that's a problem.
Nick's on with Warren Smith. Dude, who's
but what
Warren
makes
Smith?
it so pervasive is that so much of the influence doesn't come from without.
Does this guy know
it comes
Keith
from
Woods?
Within. It doesn't come from outside. It comes from inside. It comes from Americans who are ethnically or religiously Jewish that will have an affinity with Israel.
She cooked
now, obviously, a guy like Dave Smith
guy from Fiverr,
is deeply critical of
guy's
Israel
a YouTuber.
and critical of the actions of the
He's
Israeli
a hater.
state.
Keith
but
Woods'
as
son.
somebody who is Jewish and frequently talks about his ancestors in the Holocaust,
Does this guy know about
as
the
someone
BBC,
who is sort of like an agnostic,
Bearded
as a
community?
libertarian, it begs the question, is this somebody who fundamentally opposes, for example, that we have too much Jewish power in America? Because that is how I would frame the problem. I would say that it's not just an issue that Israel has a foreign lobby in America. The foreign lobby is so powerful because Jews are so powerful in America. And you would have to look at their Jewishness as a qualifying
He's a BBC
factor.
orbiter.
Like the reason that these Jewish billionaires,
Nikolai!
like Bill Ackman, Jacob Hellberg, Miriam
Look at the
Adelson,
screen,
the reason
dude.
they care so much is because of that ethnic identity. And now, and this is not something that I'm just coming up with myself. I'm not imagining this.
All right, I'm playing
Dave
Alien
Smith
on my
said
other
Joe
screen.
Rogan when he did that debate.
While I watch
with,
this, I'm playing
that guy
Alien.
whose name I always forget. Douglas Murray. I forgot it on. I'm not. When I do that, I'm not like doing like a. I'm not shitting on that person. I just forget genuinely. But when he was doing that debate with Douglas Murray, he said, "I agree with you. There is this anti-Semitic element that is denying the Holocaust, that is anti-Jewish, et cetera, et cetera." And I said, well, that's interesting. And then on another show, he characterized Israel as a satellite of America, when I would say that it's the reverse. I would say that Israel does not actually function as a satellite effectively. They act really more like our colonial
just
master.
Got a free
if
kill
anything, they are the patron. We are the client in many ways.
Yes.
And so I think his Jewishness has a lot to do with it.
Daddy
now,
Nick says 33-degree Royper.
I don't think that somebody being Jewish precludes them from understanding the breadth of the issue. Somebody like Ron Unz or somebody like Israel Shayhak. These are examples of two Jews that I have read, and Israel Shayhak is an Israeli. And they are able to call out the fundamental nature of the issue despite being ethnically Jewish themselves. So I don't think it precludes you intrinsically that you're Jewish. You can't see the forest for the trees. But I do think, and it goes without saying, it's like anything. We all have a bias. There's a tendency to maybe miss that. There's a bias if you have that affinity. And I have more things to say about it, but that's sort of the basics, and I'll leave it at there.
No, that brings me to my next question. It seems logical what you're pointing out, that there are big money businessmen who are going to have invested interest. Okay, yeah, so I guess that's what you're saying with Jewish power in America. I understand people are wincing at that, which kind of leads me to my question that follows up with what Candace was saying to you. You're articulating the idea of like when Daryl Cooper said the same thing, you were bothered.
Is this guy
by
like
that.
a liberal?
Could you delve into that a bit and talk about how with Joe Rogan you were talking? She goes, so you think this is a psyop? Dave Smith is a psyop? You say essentially yes, and you mentioned Joe Rogan. What would the psyop be? What is Joe Rogan's motivation?
Well, I don't even know that it's necessarily intentional, but I think that it doesn't matter whether it's intentional or not, because the effect is the same. And what the effect is to define down the problem, is basically to dilute it. And what I hear a lot from people like Tucker, from people like Candace, it's very subtle if you're new to the subject, but for someone like myself, I've thought about it a lot, and I've gone into depth about, what is really fundamental about it. And I'll give you an example. So Tucker, this is the better example, in my opinion. Tucker said at Turning Point USA, he said, everybody in Washington, D.C. knows that Jeffrey Epstein worked for Israeli intelligence. He said, everyone believes that, but no one can say it. And they can't say it because they're afraid to.
Let's look at Tumblr, Nick Fuentes right now.
We need to say that. He said, because if we don't, and he literally said, those in Washington, D.C., where he lived for many years, he said, if we don't acknowledge that Epstein worked for Israel, he said, then the only people that are going to be talking about this are the subterranean, creepy anti-Semites. He said, so it's better for us to acknowledge it. And what he's suggesting there, what he's hinting at, is that it's really sort of more about narrative control. Do you understand the subtle distinction? It's almost like saying, if you care about Israel. And he said that too. He says, I'm not against Israel. If you think I'm against Israel, you've lost the plot. I love Israel. I support Israel. They're sort of saying, if you support Israel, you need to recognize that defending them or having this appearance of bias is not helping us. And it's causing us to lose the narrative
my Irish
to people
pookie
that
forever,
genuinely
mwah, mwah.
don't like Israel or genuinely are opposed to Israel. He said, so in a bid to sort of retake the initiative and control the narrative, we have to make some selective admissions and say, okay, being against foreign aid is reasonable, not anti-Semitic. Okay, Epstein was Mossad. We should admit it, it's factual. But they're sort of doing this to not lose the bigger war. They're sort of losing the battle and doing a strategic retreat to not lose the war, which is to still get people to support Israel. Same with Charlie Kirk, who did the focus group.
Can they write some
he
gay
had everybody
fanfic?
kind of air out their grievances, but was guiding them and steering them back to this kind of fundamental assertion, which is,
one of you.
We love Israel. That's the Holy Land where Christ lived. We support Israel. We're not anti-Semites. We're not cheering on Iran, but we just have some issues about Netanyahu or about foreign aid. And that's by definition, it's defining the issue down. Now, I would say that if Israel is doing the things that they admit Israel is doing, then we do have to oppose their influence, like directly. And it makes them not our ally. And why would we support them? And by the way, cheering on Iran, I don't have any love for the Islamic regime inherently, but if Israel is competing with America for hegemony over the Middle East,
doing a show
would
at
it not
Warren right
behoove
now.
America to have balance?
I wish Warren was hotter so I could imagine Nick banging him, says
now, that's
JD
a large topic, but suffice to
we
say,
need a Groyper General gay fanfic channel in the Discord.
Saying, we're not going to cheer on Iran.
Where are they streaming?
We still support
Twitter.
Israel. We're not against them. We still love them. These are foregone conclusions. That's presumptuous. And I think they want to, by any means necessary, keep that. And they're willing to maybe make some admissions. And some of it, I think, is more intentional and some of it is less intentional. But as I said, the effect is to define the issue down. And that's what I'm concerned with.
So are you cheering on Iran?
No, I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm cheering them on. I think that's, as I said, I think that's sort of a disingenuous way to phrase it. I think that there's a difference between saying that Iran should not have regime change and cheering them on.
Okay.
I don't think Iran should be destroyed, because if Iran is destroyed or there's regime change, Israel will dominate the region and they will have hegemony over it. And that will make them very powerful. And that's not good for America. Okay. So I don't know that I don't like seeing anybody die. And I have people will clip this. When there were drone strikes after Israel bombed Iran, I was dancing during that, so we're going to be honest here and say that, yeah, we said, okay, it's good that Iran's retaliating. But I mean, one, I'm a live streamer, we're being funny. But two, when Israel bombed Iran, that's a very destabilizing thing.
I was photographed dancing after
for
the
Iran
Iranian
to
strikes.
establish deterrence, I think that's their right, and I think that's justified. And I don't want to see Iran fall, not for their sake, but for ours.
Got you. So where is the line? When does something become anti-Semitic?
I think that the thing is, to me, that's just a made up word like racism. I think that even the Jews have realized this and they've pivoted to Jew hate. You notice that? They no longer say anti-Semitic as much. Now they specifically say it's Jew hatred. And I guess I prefer that term too, because I don't consider myself a Jew hater. An anti-Semite, where that line is, that is the subject of much debate. And there are laws being passed that say it's anti-Semitic to say that Jews are loyal to Israel. Well, they kind of are, and they say it's anti-Semitic to say that Jews killed Jesus. Well, they kind of did. Now, as a Catholic, you would say that, strictly speaking, everyone killed Jesus. The Romans killed Jesus and the Jews killed Jesus. And that was supposed to mean that all of our sins put him on the cross. But to not acknowledge the Jews' role in it is to deny the gospel, because I don't know how familiar you are, but it very clearly says they called for him to be crucified. They freed Barabbas, And so those are two examples of things that, as a Christian or as someone with common sense, those are two things you have to believe. And yet, Jews would say that's anti-Semitic. So I would draw the line at hatred. I would never say a sentence like, I hate all Jews or screw them or anything like that.
Me either.
But what I don't think is anti-Semitic is to say they have too much power. I don't think there's anything hateful about that at all. I don't think it's anti-Semitic to say their loyalty is in question or that they're tribal. I think all of that's descriptive. Now, you can use that variously. Those things can be said positively, negatively. I think they're descriptive. And I think, we have to kind of move beyond these well, what is racism? I'm more interested in what is going on,
Yeah, for me, I struggle with it a little bit because when it comes to conversation around reparations for slavery, my argument is you can't hold white people today to account for things that happened outside of their lifetimes. They're only responsible for their actions, what they say and do. Mm-hmm. So how can I be logically consistent if I'm going to claim, yes, but your ancestors killed Jesus? Now, I can understand if you wanted to go to war with the people that killed Jesus, if you could somehow time travel, but how are we not contradicting ourselves logically if we're going to go towards the ancestors who can't help? And I know Candace was trying to allude to this a bit.
True.
I'm honestly just struggling with that a bit. How do I be logically consistent with that?
Well, I'm not saying, notice I said that it's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that is, they have this definition of anti-Semitism, which says it's anti-Semitic to say the Jews killed Jesus, but they did. I'm not saying that the Jews today, now in the gospel, it says that the blood is on all their hands. Now, you can read that a number of different ways. That's a theological matter, but the narrative is true that, yes, the Jews and the Romans put Christ on the cross. I'm not saying that, the Romans and the Jews today, we should be coming up to them and saying, hey, you killed Jesus. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they say that's anti-Semitic to say that even from a narrative point of view.
I agree with you. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
To hold to, and that also goes to freedom of religion. You have every right to have your beliefs. And I think it's ridiculous that you've been debanked.
So true. Jimbo, why is there actually gay people in your chat?
Not convicted of a crime.
Which ones?
It should be illegal to prevent you from being able to bank.
They need to talk about Hitler more.
It has
JDI.
become this kind of perfect
storm. I noticed that too.
Going back to with
not enough mentions.
And this is another one I'm trying to contend with logically. For me, there's a first principle line that my transformation really came when I was in graduate school and I was told not to talk in this 4-hour class after this protest claiming that Emerson College was racist. I was told because of the color of my skin that I should concede my space and not speak for the 4-hour class. And I was like, wait, what is going on? This seems to be contrary to everything I thought was right. So that would be an example of when that line is crossed.
This guy looks like Moist Critical.
Immutable characteristics, kind of
similar
shaved his
hair.
Well, your ancestors killed Jesus.
But Martin won't see that one.
And I do consider myself
get what I'm saying.
Religious. So, I think we can identify racism. If we were to throw out the concept of racism entirely, look, racism is always going to exist within the human soul. For me, it's when you can think and feel however you want. It's always going to occur. There's the conversation around systemic racism. When do we see it implemented in law, that legal framework? That's when it gets concerning. So if someone, and I don't know if you're pushing for this or not, but if someone were to push legal changes, segregation, you're going to have to use separate water fountains or bathrooms or whatnot. That's a clearly identifiable line. Would you have a problem? Which I heard you mention something about water fountains. Was that a comedy thing? Because when I was trying to prepare for this, Nick, to be honest with you, I was like, I don't know much about you. So
I don't think that we should share water fountains.
And make these little documentaries on YouTube. And there's that one. And my first knee-jerk reaction was, he's calling for segregation. Then someone said to me, wait a minute, look at this again. He's just kind of saying, I'm over this thing. So can you just clarify that for me? Do you really want separate water fountains and bathrooms?
No, that's a clip from 6 years ago, right? I basically said, get over it. I said, slavery, Jim Crow, it all happened. Get over it. It's time to move on. And as far as, that's a whole other subject, the race subject, which when we can go into that if you want,
same water fountain as them.
To maybe wrap up on the terms racism and anti-Semitism, I have no problem discussing what they are about. My problem is that those words to me are so charged and political. What racism effectively is white people hating black people. That is effectively what that means in the consciousness. And I just don't think it's useful. I would unpack that and talk about prejudice, discrimination, cruelty, racial hatred. And, you would have to break each of those down, and not making it complicated, but just saying, I don't have racial hatred. I don't have hatred in my heart for anybody. I don't consider myself a prejudiced person. I don't look at a person and judge them based on immutable characteristics. Now, as far as something like tribalism goes, I do consider myself tribalistic. I think, as you said, it's in our soul. I think tribalism is in our soul because we are genetic. We're flesh and we're spirit. And I think that, we are more comfortable with people that we're familiar with. And familiarity means a lot of things. People that look like us, talk like us. And I actually don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, actually. We also make generalizations. I don't think that's wrong either. And there's a big difference, in my opinion, between prejudice and a generalization. I would never say that I'm not going to trust somebody because they are black. But we all know that there is an underclass in America of black people that act a certain way. Now, if a black person comes into my store and he's got his pants around his ankles and he's swaggering around and he's on speakerphone, I'm going to make some generalizations and say, here we go. Oh boy, here we go. Now, maybe I'm going to give him a chance, and maybe he comes up and is very polite and says, hello, sir, I'd like to buy something. And then, I'll treat him like I would treat anybody else. But, we sort of are
hello,
in
sir.
the space where there was a time when you had these like generalizations and prejudice and discrimination and hatred. And then I think we went really far in this other direction where we said race doesn't exist. Like, we can make no inferences. We can make no generalizations. There are no patterns. We have to strive to be race blind. And I think that was ideologically motivated. And we're trying to find this, like, I don't want to call it a middle ground, but how do you dispense with
a middle ground between cruelty and racism?
Like a primitive form of prejudice and racial hatred without dispensing with common sense, and that's kind of where I'm at. That's why I say I'm kind of post-racist. I think race is real. We have to look at it. We also shouldn't hate people. We should try to treat people as individuals and give people a fair shake. But as a society, we also have to judge based on groups. We do have to look at groupings and how they identify. So it's a bit more complicated than just, are you racist? Yes or no? It's like everything, it's a little more complicated. So, but we can move on to the segregation thing if you want to.
Yeah, real quick, let's follow up on that real quick. So we're talking about the tribal nature of the human soul, which I think looking at history, we're going to see. And this goes to two concepts. The first would be like with the Italian mafia, for example, we see this played out throughout history. And all the way to you're part Italian, I believe. And my mom spends more time. My mom spends more time in Italy than in the U.S. I've spent probably over a year in Italy. I'm fascinated with the Renaissance and the Medici and the Borgia. I know you're Catholic as well. And so the Medici were essentially the first mafia family that kind of created this model, and they realized, well, keeping it within the family, it just has efficacy. It's the best way to do business in an untrustworthy world. That comes to America. Let's imagine that RICO doesn't happen. The American mafia is able to seize power to the point where we believe they control the banks or Hollywood, which is the next thing I want to get into. But would it not be more logical to go after the mafia? And maybe this is silly because I'm not sure you're even doing this, but some people will, the equivalency would be to attack all Italians, claiming that that's inherent. This mafia spirit is inherent in the genetics or the religion, or somehow
it is
ingrained within Italian people.
It literally is.
I think it's more cultural. We were just talking about the Medici and the history, the shared history.
Well, you're very right. I mean, the Italians had a lot of similarity with the Jews because they're clannish. And it wasn't even all Italians, it was Southern Italians. It was Sicilians, it was Calabrians. And what made them so powerful as a mafia? Extremely clannish, kept it in the family, just like the Jews. There's family values. And also they were transnational.
Wow.
That's the other thing. A big benefit that they had, and you see it even in the movies, is that they had the Italians in exile, the Italians as immigrants in America, but also the Italians in the homeland. And there was this sort of arbitrage that they had in the same way that the Jews have that power too. Now, you would not be wrong in those days, in the 30s and 40s, to say Italians are sympathetic to the mafia, because they were. And, just like with the Jews, there's this debate about is it all Jews? Is it the ones that are powerful? Is it the ones that are powerful and bad? But, that's also an oversimplification, because just like with the Jews, to make it less politically charged, yes, ordinary Italians, many of them were way overly sympathetic to the mafia. And I know that because my family was too. My grandmother probably took out a mob loan when she was in Chicago. And, this is a story I think I've told on my show, but after my grandmother's husband died, she had to support
kind of an interesting
her 2
angle,
kids
actually.
with, she didn't have a job. She was a stay-at-home mom. Her husband died. She wasn't going to get remarried. And my mother believes that she probably took a loan from the mob because every week after my grandfather died, one of these very famous gangsters from Chicago would come and visit her and bring a basket of fruit and, and meet with the family. And, looking back, my mom says, oh, I thought he was just a nice guy. Probably he was coming to collect a payment or something. And you know what? My grandmother always used to say what you want about the gangsters and the mafia, she said, but when they were going to kill somebody, they killed who they intended to kill. They weren't like these gangbangers now who just kill, an 11-year-old in an alleyway. She said they provided a service and they got their person when they wanted to kill somebody. And it's like, that is an ethnic bias. So that was real. Now, the difference is that Italians assimilated. Okay. The Italian mafia was broken up by the government and it's no longer really an entity. Italians assimilated. They, like myself, I speak English. I have no affinity with Italy. And that's the story of most Italians. Most Italians barely have an Italian-American identity, let alone an Italian identity.
Honest criminals.
Now, the reason why Jews are different is because Jews have been unassimilable for 2,000 years. And
WTF, Nick is as worse as the Jews.
I'm comfortable for the sake of argument saying it's cultural. They're unlike any other group. And unlike the Italians, they were stateless. For 2,000 years, they were in all the European countries. And just like the Medicis, the Rothschilds were such a strong banking family, not just because it was all in the family, but because they had members in every capital. And for 2,000 years to survive, they had to resist intermarrying. They had to resist cultural pressure or government mandates to assimilate. They were converted by the sword, and still they maintained their religious identity. And so once again, it gets back to the uniqueness of the Jews. Now, you could say it's genetic. You could say it's cultural. I would just say there's uniqueness there. And that's why, people say, well, why is it always about the Jews? Well, they are unlike any other group. There is no other people that has been stateless for as long as they have, that has resisted assimilation,
obsessed with them.
That has this miraculous story where they come back to the land, that
so
has
evil.
This spread over the whole world. I mean, name one other people that has such a powerful diaspora. There is no comparison. So we have to treat it with the, the kind of exceptionalism that it deserves, in my opinion.
Would the Catholic Church be a fair comparison, or would that be unfair?
I think that's similar. Yeah. I don't think it's similar in terms of, you would have to look at what they do. But yeah, on its face, yes, you would, strictly speaking, have to look at it for that kind of influence. Sure.
Okay. As far as assimilation, because there's this idea of Hollywood. Let's tackle that for a minute. So, because many would argue that the Jewish people did assimilate remarkably well into Hollywood. They kind of chose, we have the Italian, we had the mafia, we had the Irish gangs, we had all these gangs in the 20s, in the teens around that time. And they chose their business that was kind of viewed, it was looked down upon by many already ingrained within the culture, as though it was many, like, what is this, moving pictures? They're standing on stage like play actors. This is beneath us. And they went for it, and they seized this new technology. And there was a large number of them that established this business. But if you look into the history, that we see this remarkable effort to assimilate and to make movies in that time, that they were trying to tell the American dream in a way of, because I do think that was shared by most immigrants, this fear of, we need to assimilate. So I'm trying to identify, where is this unique inability to assimilate happening?
I think you'd have to go to what assimilation means. When I say unassimilable, I mean, to this day, many of them, and the ones that we're talking about for our purpose here, are someone like a Sheldon Adelson. He was born in America, but he says, my heart is in Israel. I wish I served in the IDF. He was buried in Israel. Now, he spoke English. He was an American businessman. He was born here. And, maybe if you saw him walking down the street, you'd think he's a white businessman. But if he says, my heart is in Israel, I wish I served in the Israeli Defense Forces, his casket was flown to Israel and he was buried there, would you say that's assimilation? I don't think so. Yeah. And same with someone like Bill Ackman or Sean McGuire, Harvey Weinstein, who I've been criticizing Candace Owens for. He says, in my heart, I'm a Zionist. To me, assimilation means you see yourself as part of the whole. You see yourself as one of the many. Now, you might say I'm, like me, I would say I'm Italian American, but I'm American. I have no connection to Italy. I wouldn't be buried in Italy. I would never say my heart is in Italy. I'm like,
My heart is
I
in
wish
Italy.
I served in the Italian military. I'm an American. My show's called America First. And I think that's true of a lot of Americans. And what makes them unassimilable is that, for thousands of years, they had their own language. They had Yiddish, and sometimes they spoke the local language, but they maintained the sense of we are the outsiders. Even though in many cases they might look like the rest of us, they might operate like the rest of us, they still think of themselves as Jewish, maybe first and foremost. And that's not all of them, but that's a lot of them. And you don't have to imagine very far. Someone like a Ben Shapiro, a Sheldon Adelson, that congressman, Brian Mast, who showed up as an IDF uniform in Congress, Randy Fine. These people are not assimilated at all. So I think, that's the operative word there.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to their religion and the fact that there's this war. So an honest question, if the Catholic Church came under siege from Italians, would you go fight?
Probably not. No, I don't think so. If Italy was under attack, but that's a hypothetical. I think that, if that was happening, I don't know, to tell you the truth, that's a personal question. I don't know how I would feel, but if I were a non-Catholic American, I would have the same question. And I think that'd be a fair question to ask. But what is happening now is an Israel war. So, and that's kind of been the equation for 50 years.
Gotcha. All right. So let's move it.
Okay.
My big concern.
Okay.
I brought this up to Dave Rubin yesterday, man, when I was talking to him, and I probably shouldn't have, but he was like, "All right, Warren, what's something that's concerning that you think we should be talking about?" And I don't think he wanted to go into this, and I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't air it. But if he does air it, I don't want you to feel caught off by it, because the first thing that came out of my mouth was talking about extremism. I actually used the word fascism, and I want to explain why. And then I saw the look on his face, because this is a guy who's been ranting about, I don't mean that in a bad way, but who's been making fun of Antifa. And now we've got Sydney Sweeney's jeans. I'm not talking about Sydney Sweeney's jeans and all this nonsense, but we saw the Jubilee debate the other day, whatever, but do you think it's fair
Where's this
that
going?
What's
going on?
There's a rise in people that are questioning.
Is this like the AJ collab where they just agree with each other the whole time?
A king. What do you?
No, I think he's interviewing him.
And rather than the framework that the
I don't
founding
think they're
fathers
on the
created,
same
having
page.
a monarchy, for example, or Christian rule. This could take various shapes, but my concern is the loss of the framework that the founding fathers created, and that could happen in various ways. And I was trying, and I told him, I was like, yeah, tomorrow I have this conversation with Nick Fuentes. I just don't think he wanted to go into that, but I wasn't trying to correlate you with fascism. Mm-hmm. So my question, let's just start with this. So again,
Bro's
looking at
worried
these
to offend the mob,
quick
Italian mob.
Saying, that's why we need fascism. All right. Would you, let's just get it off the table. Would you consider yourself a fascist? Probably not. If not, where did the fascists get it wrong? Why not?
Well, I would, if somebody asked me, what's your ideology? I would not say I'm a fascist. And then the reason why is because I think that fascism is anachronistic. I think it's
Mussolini specifically.
As an ideology, it's spent. I mean, that moment sort of passed. And the way that I see the 21st century is we're sort of post-ideological. I think the last century and the century before that was a very ideological age where people are trying to create these doctrines, communism and fascism. And of course, they were in many ways reciprocal. The socialists and the fascists, there was a lot of interplay between them. And I think we're just kind of past that. So I wouldn't call myself any kind of ism, like I'm a fascist, I'm a socialist. I think that obfuscates at this point more than it elucidates. But what I would say is that I'm less averse to a stronger executive, to a king, to an autocracy. Now, as I've gotten older, I'm not going to lie, I certainly have moved. I'm more skeptical of it than I used to be. When I was younger, I would say, we need a king and we got to get rid of democracy. I'm certainly a skeptic of democracy, and I certainly think it has failed. I think that's why a lot of people are saying that these days, because there's no efficacy. The democratic government has no efficacy. And what's more, there's this like democratic deficit. It's so funny in the European Union, which is supposed to be all about our sacred democracy. There is no democracy. The European Congress, the European Parliament is not democratic at all. Like, they can't even create their own bills. Everything that comes through the European Parliament comes from the European Commission, which is unelected. And they describe that as a democratic deficit. I would call that like an oligarchy. I would call that a bureaucratic state, not a democratic deficit. So there's this question of, our government has no efficacy, and it's not responsive to the needs or the wants of the people. So it's not really a democracy, and it also isn't working. So what do you do in that situation? Well, people start to say, and this is, as you know, this is the natural evolution of things. The people cry out for a tyrant. The people cry out for a dictator. Give us change. Give us reform. And I certainly feel that. I think that's compelling. I'm a little skeptical of it as time goes on, because as I get older and more mature, I think we maybe take for granted.
Dude, now he's cucking on fascism. It's over.
Maybe I've become ironically more conservative in my disposition, and saying, like, maybe let's not race ahead of ourselves and get rid of things which have been around for hundreds of years. But certainly, I think when you look at somebody like Trump, this is a guy who
fuck this and fuck
has
chat
received
for
two strong mandates for real change, and has not been able to deliver because of the bureaucracy, because of the courts, because of the Congress. So, I hear what you're saying when you say the constitutional system's going away. I would argue the constitutional system is already impaired, because it's being abused by all the other organs of government. Even the Supreme Court voted 8-1 that said these injunctions are out of control. And you've got these like procedural things in the Senate, the filibuster. The president can't fire as many people as he'd like to fire without all this oversight. It's like, we do need an executive organ of government. So I would say that we should start with a more powerful president. And I would not be opposed to, something like a king that sits over the presidency. I would not be opposed to a system like they have in the UK, or, in another structure where there's like a prime minister and a president, because I do think there's a value in having like a true sovereign. I do think there's something useful in that. But
what would the powers of the king be? Let's say we were debating dropping a bomb on Iran. That same scenario, would the king make that decision, or would the president still?
I don't know. I mean, it would, I haven't put a lot of thought into what this imaginary system would look like, but I'm just speaking more towards my inclination. I think that it would not be the worst thing, even just to have somebody like I just got killed by an evolved puppy that would step in like an extraordinary circumstance for stability or something like that. I haven't put a lot of thought into what my reformed government would look like, but I would start with the stronger president, and then maybe like a king. And I don't know, maybe it would be like the prime minister would have that role, or the head of government would have that obligation, and the head of state would maybe even sit even higher above, like a repository institution. But I think we should be thinking definitely more in that direction.
Interesting, because you saw the Jubilee clip, right? That went viral and all that. Yeah. And my first reaction to that is that guy probably doesn't, I don't know, maybe he doesn't fully understand fascism, but when the other guy responds, he's like, well, you're going to have this individual in power who's going to eliminate opposition. You're not worried that you're going to be eliminated. Well, no, he's going to take out the bad guys. I'm going to be on the right team. And there is something deeply naive about that.
He didn't even think about this.
It's strange. So I did want to bring that up to you, because
that turkey was kicking my ass right there. Did you see that?
Did create this experiment that wasn't perfect, but it allowed somehow, to me as a religious person, I think it was like they had this opportunity, and through prayer and thought, it's almost like the hand of God came down and provided his providence to create this thing that would allow the growth that has occurred. I know there's pushback on certain growth, but it's like, do you think they got it? Do you think they got it wrong?
I don't know that they got it wrong, but I think that, the natural tendency of a society is to degenerate no matter what system it is, whether it's a communist system, whether it's a socialist, fascist system. All societies have this tendency towards degeneration, regardless of the system. What's more, the type of government, Rousseau wrote about this too, the type of government that you have really depends on the size and the nature of the society. And I think that, calling ourselves a republic and saying we're into self-government and checks and balances, I think that certainly worked better when we had a small population of a homogeneous or relatively homogeneous people. But clearly we have gone so above and beyond that. We're now extremely diverse, very large. We are an empire. We have this bureaucratic technological state.
Fishing rods.
I think it's certainly worth revision. And that's why we have the amendments, right? But have the amendments been good? I mean, if anything, we just have a bigger and bigger democracy. Is that really what's called for as the country becomes larger, to have more of a direct democracy? I think it's actually the opposite. So I think that maybe they didn't get it wrong, but I think maybe we've outgrown a lot of those considerations. I'll even go as far as to say something like the Second Amendment. I mean, and maybe I'd get criticized for this, but I'm just free thinking here. Ideally, you would want a society that is so orderly.
They're throwing stuff at me.
Do you really want people running around with guns all the time? I mean, I know the argument about, and I am pro Second Amendment, I have guns, but something like that, it's like that is a clear instance where the left kind of makes a point about how we've outgrown
severely wounded
some of the things that are in there. I'm going to get a lot of shit for saying that, but I just think that's true. And like a modern city, should everybody be packing heat like that? I mean, ideally, you'd have so much public order wouldn't be necessary. And there's other things too, but I think that the system we have deserves a lot of revision based on the changes that have taken place in the world and in the country in the past 300 years. And unfortunately, in theory, there's this process to change it, and yet we've never really seen that in motion. Like the idea of a constitutional convention, or an amendment being passed through Congress, it just seems like so far out of reach. Even if we wanted it to happen, it doesn't seem possible. So yeah, that would be I know that's very general, but I think we've outgrown it.
Yeah, the last thing I'd say about this, for me, it transcends politics. It goes more that I think they got it right because they accurately created this system that reflects what I think echoes the idea of God, the sovereign individual, the pursuit of liberty, that phrase, liberty or death.
I'm trying to do street performing.
The individual in the pursuit of autonomy, which we describe as like the pursuit of happiness, because what is liberty in its purest form, if not pure autonomy, independent, like you don't need anyone else. That would be you at your most free, off the grid or in whatever pursuit you're doing. You don't need the banks. You've experienced that, they have the power to debank. So that would be, so I think that's what they were trying to create, this framework to allow an individual to do. And in order for an individual to do that, well, they can't be oppressed by a grand narrative, which is what did give rise to fascism.
They're giving me money.
And they recognized, okay, well, an individual needs the ability to have freedom to worship and to choose their religion, but baked within the idea of freedom of religion logically has to be the ability to choose no religion, to have true freedom of religion. Otherwise, it's
this is like Team Keith Woods at home.
Oh, I have to choose one. Well, yeah, dude, that's not technically freedom of religion. So, and then there's a raging debate that ties into my concern.
Dude, I'm not even listening to what he's saying. I'm just trying to play music in this game.
Really, they're good.
You call this music?
Really interesting arguments.
Dude, they're just beating me up and booing me.
They think that we should have Christian rule. But the argument usually is, well, it should occur at the state level because they're right, there is nothing in the Constitution about the prevention of church and state at the state level. And if you want to do that, I think the state, if there's enough people within that state, go for it. But this idea of the sovereign I think the right level of analysis at the individual level, which leads us into the next thing I want to ask you about, which came up with Candace, this idea of genetics with different races. And I'll just lay out my thoughts on it would be, all right, so you talk about IQ differences, and upon hearing that, it's like, well, that could be entirely possible. My immediate reaction is kind of like, well, so what? Because if you were to let's take 1 million purple people, 1 million yellow people, and we somehow apply this test to be able to establish IQ. Okay, do you know
I want to treat myself
what
to a
the difference
pan.
in IQ, what that spread is? What is the size of that disparity? Do you know?
Between purple people or you mean
I'm
blacks
sorry,
and whites?
sorry, I was using between blacks and whites.
It's well, I mean, the average says
Yellow
100 for
people?
whites, 85
Japanese?
for American blacks.
Okay, so there's a solid number. Okay, because I know that there is conversation around that, and it's been in this. I believe it really took
Guy's
off in the
fucking
60s. They had
racist.
less data, and I
Gross,
understand
dude.
that conversation
up.
has been shut down. And anytime I think you shut down the pursuit of science, especially, you're in for a world of trouble. And like the Sydney Sweeney Jeans commercial around eugenics, that's not eugenics. That's the recognition of how genes work. Like if she's just making the comment, good genes make you beautiful. That's true. That's not eugenics. So tell me what you think about this, because I do believe like the right
That's
level of
literally
analysis still to the
something Hitler
individual,
would
because
say,
if
dude.
we had
What are you talking about?
100 people on the basketball court, I think we can generally come
That's
to an
gross.
agreement like black people tend to play basketball better, or on average probably jump higher. That's probably has something to do with science. I don't know exactly what the explanation would be, but if we had 100 people and you and I were drafting basketball teams, I wouldn't be choosing them based on race. It would still be, well, how good are you as an individual at playing basketball? Do we have any disagreement on that?
No. Yeah, no, I don't think so. But the thing is, I mean,
I would make an all-white team.
How do we explain why blacks make up, a disproportionate number of the basketball players? Now, if you were saying, well, the reason is because there's like people are breaking white people's legs, so they're shorter. You would say, well, no, black people are born taller, or something like that would have explanatory power of why there's this.
Dude, I knew that's why I'm not 6'8".
Similarly, when you see all these black people that are chronically unemployed and struggling in school and not having success, one explanation is, well, the white man's keeping them down. The other explanation is maybe inherently they're not as well off as white people. And that's really where that comes in.
Okay, so it's cultural as well. You're saying there might be differences in IQ that scientifically can be described, but it's probably cultural is the primary.
No, I'm not saying that at all. No, I'm saying it's genetic.
It is. Okay, so all right, but then we would go back to the Italians forming the mafia. Was that cultural, echoing back to their history, or was that genetic? An inclination, they have a genetic inclination for crime?
The penchant for somebody to be clannish, I think, is probably more cultural, but it could have a genetic component. A person's aptitude for math and reading and science, spatial reasoning, verbal reasoning, I think that's genetic. And that's really the question, because, how well people are able to solve problems has impact on what kind of jobs they could do and, how successful they're going to be in society. And that does seem to be a genetic trait. When you look at the SAT scores, the IQ test scores, there's been studies that have been done on twins.
Yeah, this guy's evil.
Adoption studies, things like that. I mean, so there's a lot of data out there which you should really familiarize yourself with, because it's an extensive debate. And I'm not going to reproduce all the literature here, but the thing is, we found out a long time ago that genes express themselves. Too tall people have kids, they're going to have tall kids. Too smart people have kids, they're going to have smart kids. And it's like, what do you do with that information? Some people, when we found that out, said, what if we took the most beautiful smart people and bred them with the other most beautiful smart people, and then we had a race of beautiful smart people? And then they probably took that too far, and they said, what if we eliminated all the people that are dumb and ugly? And I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think that's evil, but it is kind of an uncomfortable fact. It's like, what do you do with this reality that you have human inequality, is how I would describe it, within a population, between populations. And, their aptitude is one problem. Their ability to integrate is another.
Interesting. All right. Yeah, man. So with Trump and all this,
interesting.
I've heard you talking about Epstein, and you've kind of spoken out against Trump.
Anyway,
what do you think the right move is? Are you inclined to support Elon's third party? What are you going to do?
I am. Well, I don't want to announce my plans,
I'm joining
but I've
Elon.
been thinking a lot about it. I'm a big fan of not voting. I've been on this for years now. I didn't vote in the special Senate election in 2020. I told people to stay home in the midterms in 22. I told people not to vote for Trump in 24. I really think that we have to like disintegrate the Republican Party for something new to grow, and it can grow within the GOP or outside of it.
Yeah,
but
man.
we basically, we basically need to get all these disaffected voters to stop just voting for the GOP every single time. So if the America Party breaks them out of that, I think it's a positive development. Anything that leads to people kind of becoming free agents instead of loyal Republicans, I'm in favor of that. So I'm probably gonna encourage people to sit this one out and do a protest vote.
Cool. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm trying to press you where I can, where I have in the past those concerns.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the conversation so far?
Yeah, ask me whatever you want, man. No, I think you don't come across as extreme. To be completely honest with you, I have some disagreement around your push.
Dude, he's tricking him successfully.
A monarchy, I
successfully mind control.
I can understand the efficacy argument. Yeah, it is inefficient, but I do think
he wants to fuck Nick. He's gay.
Government, except for all the others. I can't think of, and the problem is when I press people on this, they can't provide me a specific alternative. They just say, "Well, I'd be more inclined for something resembling this or that." I do think we are seeing patterns that echo, like Oswald Mosley, for example, where even in the 70s, in his last interview, I don't know if it was his last interview, but if you were to ask him, did you hate Jews? He's like, no, I had many Jewish friends. And I just I dislike a small number of Jews who were dragging us into war with Poland. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds familiar around Iraq, but I understand you lay out a good argument, but I'm seeing, what I try and do is identify these logical patterns, and it's not so much about, when you are dealing with logic, it's like, it's not what I feel about it, it's whether the logic indicates it or not. But yeah,
this guy is so autistic.
Do you have any questions for me as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wonder, because I will say just quickly, a lot of people might watch this and say, oh, Nick is going liberal. In many ways, I have kind of, I don't want to say taken like a leftward
he's a liberal
turn, but I have become.
The Tumblr girls are going to love that.
And I think this happens with everybody. You get a little older and I become a little bit less like,
Hilton Headgrow,
I would say ideologically,
thank you, Hilton Headgrow, welcome. Sonny Groiper,
skeptical of a lot of the arguments for it, because there's this whole argument from Carlyle where he says like the best form of government is where you find the most capable man and make him the dictator. And to me, that just seems like a LARP. I mean, that just seems like role play, because it's like, yeah, and if we could, make everything awesome, we would make everything awesome, but it's like, as I get older, I sort of reflect and say, life in America was pretty good, actually. For the past few hundred years, it is a stable society. It is a society where I think people have been able to get along pretty well. And so I've been a little more skeptical of some of the, rambunctious stuff I said 10 years ago. And I don't take that back. I think, it's a process, but I mean, just hearing you say that, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit more skeptical of it too. But I guess my question is, so what is your position then on
Nick is cucking
Israel
out
and the Jews? Because obviously there's something up. How would you characterize it? Or what do you think I'm getting wrong about it?
Let's go to Hollywood back to the Hollywood example. My grandfather worked, and he was the head of the art department of Warner Brothers.
He's a fucking liberal.
My last name's Smith. I'm not Jewish. He wasn't Jewish. My ancestry traces back to England. I've never really thought about until recently, until it started popping up in the news. I never really thought about it. I was pretty naive. But going back to the idea of Hollywood, I think that Hollywood is run now by these massive corporations. I understand
New York City is flooding.
I worked in Hollywood
probably.
For a while.
It's raining so hard outside,
and there was a lot of performative. We would take the day off on Jewish holidays to act in it, and I was like, "What? I didn't know anything about Jewish holidays." I was like, "Why are we doing this?" He's like, "Well, we have to, or you'll get in trouble." So there is that. There is a pressure to not talk about Israel. I was talking to my family about it last night, and one of my parents, they were like very concerned about this. And I said, why do you think Israel has so much influence? And they didn't have an answer. So when you come along and you are able to articulate something in the space of absence, it's going to, I think that's one of the reasons you are gaining so much momentum. I think you are on the precipice if you wanted it, you would be on the precipice of great power, which is why I wanted to
Great power.
challenge you on some of these
True.
things. Just I feel a bit better about some of these things. Like you're not what many people make you out to be.
Great power.
So you were asking me like with Israel. So
these.
I don't think that
I attack
it
them?
is what many people
Are they gonna kill
think
me?
it is. We are narrative creatures. The narrative often can take hold because we make sense of the world through these stories. But I'm not sure that it's what we think it is. And that would just be an example of many other industries. I think there's a lot of wealthy business people. So, all right, look, for example, where does power really come from in America?
Uncle Ben.
Looking back to World War II.
You're not my dad, Uncle Ben, fucking asshole.
There was no CIA.
Dude, what if Nick just said that to him right now? And it was just like Spider-Man?
The power at these universities, the senators would send their sons.
So in the lead up,
the year before Pearl Harbor, which I know you had some theories on Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt's godson was president of the student body. And I found this story in the Harvard archive when I was doing my thesis, just about this time period, to make a movie.
I rewatched that movie recently, and it's hilarious how he goes,
Kennedy.
You're not my fucking
brother,
dad.
Joe Kennedy was supposed to be
Uncle
the president,
Ben,
got killed
and then
in the war.
Their
dad, Joe Kennedy, Irish, originally, but his ancestry, came over, made money through organized crime, like we were talking about, and investments. He was able to get his money out right before the crash, so that blew him up. No Jewish anything to be seen. They were very concerned about Jews at Harvard. There was what we're going to use the word anti-Semitism for a minute. Just there was what people today are calling anti-Semitism looking back at this. And this is largely unknown, but there was a cap put on how many Jewish people could even enroll at Harvard. There was no women at Harvard. They were going to Radcliffe. The war changed all of that out of necessity because it essentially transformed to, we don't care what your religion is, what your gender is. Can you contribute? Can you help make this bomb, whatever it is we're doing? And that really changed the landscape like overnight once Pearl Harbor hit. But as I was examining this framework, you've got these secret societies.
For a different reason, not because of that reason.
The finals clubs, these networks between the three major Ivy Leagues, okay, Yale, Princeton, and Harvard. And there was no CIA, so they started to fill in that space. And the CIA was formed after the end of the war. But they realized we need this kind of gentleman spy. They come from well-bred families. They're wealthy, charismatic, educated, and they started recruiting them.
Is he talking about Jews?
But I do think
no one has ever said any of those things about them.
Epstein investing.
No one has
Harvard.
ever said any of that about
a school near where I live in Massachusetts, where students go for high school from the same families, and then they go to Harvard. I think there is.
I think we have another subset
network of
Americans
powerful
that would
individuals
describe
in this country. I'm just a little skeptical about it's controlled by Jews.
I don't think it's Jews.
Yeah, well, everything you just said is really good and totally true, by the way. And that I really got red-pilled on the universities recently because, you know, being from Chicago, my parents didn't go to college. My parents were working class.
Sesame.
We're ethnics, you know, we are American ethnics. My grandfather on my mom's side was a garbage man. My grandfather on my dad's side was like a heroin addict. So it's like I had no pedigree, no lineage. And so it took me a long time actually to realize how short the train ride is between DC, New York, and Harvard, and realize that corridor is so powerful, and how, you know, the Ivy Leagues really are this like elite making institution. And really, what is it? It's like what it does is select for status and then increasingly for IQ. And how do we groom the human capital and mobilize the human capital of the country, the most intelligent, into the elite strata to guide and lead the society? And then you realize the role of the universities and how they interplay with the state and with Wall Street and with finance. And you think about all these things, like the internet got started at the universities. The social media companies got started at the universities. Right. It all comes out. And even a lot of the tech stuff comes out of the research labs at these universities. And look, not to be that guy, so you're spot on. And that is like structurally how power works. That's 100% right. But then you look at how overrepresented this group is. And I'm not trying to give you unsolicited advice.
We have mountain Jews.
You got to check out Ron Unz if you haven't already. You're an intelligent guy, I can tell. This guy's off the charts brilliant. Unz Review. He is Jewish. And he has a whole series called American Pravda. And he writes about all these conspiracies. And One of them, it's called The Myth of American Meritocracy. And he writes about how, there's this contingent argument. They say, well, the reason the Jews are so powerful is because they're so smart. They're high IQ, they're educated, it's part of their culture. And certainly that's part of the truth. Like, no one would dispute, like you said, the Jews were bursting at the seams to get into Harvard despite the quotas because they were extremely talented. No one can deny. The question is it that alone? And what he did is he looked at all the...
Because they're so attractive and charismatic.
But he took this
and likable, and everyone likes them so much.
That all the seniors take. And he looked at the top scores of the test. And almost all of them were Asian. And almost none of them were Jewish. And yet a quarter of the student body at like Columbia, 25%. And many of these other Ivy League schools are Jewish. And you would say if they're 2,000% overrepresented, are they 2,000% overrepresented in the standardized tests? If the answer is no, then there's something else going on. And then you also look at the faculty. It's like, I think there's 6 out of the 8 Ivy Leagues have Jewish presidents. And then there's this war going on with the universities. What's happening as we speak? Trump is brokering these deals with Harvard, Brown, Columbia. He sees their federal loans and grants because of anti-Semitism. And who led the charge? Bill Ackman, Ronald Lauder, Jewish billionaire alumni of UPenn and Harvard, or Harvard and UPenn respectively. Ronald Lauder is the chair of the World Jewish Congress. He was tight with Epstein. And, Bill Ackman is tight with the head of BlackRock, Larry Fink. And they said, we're going to blacklist all the Israel critics. They all put money behind Trump to get elected. And what is one of the 10 planks of the GOP platform last year? Out of 10, go after the universities for the protests.
Judaism is just a religion. Israel. They're ethnic whites, just like Greeks and Italians. Why do you believe this is a race?
He's doing the... some other things, but the big pitch is
baby
like
Hitler
get anti-Semitism under control. And if you know how important the universities are, it matters if they're squelching free speech on that issue at Harvard and Columbia and Yale.
Yeah, Nick is live.
So I would just throw that out there. And I'm not trying to do blood sports with you or whatever, but just kind of add to that. Because you're spot on, and that's very good information. People need to know that the relationship with even the non-Jewish families like the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, that's all real and tight with the universities. But I think that there was like a handoff that was done during World War II, probably finalized by the 70s, where you do get the Anglo elite hands off a lot of the power to the newcomers, to a lot of Jewish people. And they're in the CIA, they're at the Ivy Leagues, all these places that they were gate kept out of, like the country club, they then got in and then became very influential. And then we started having issues. So that would be, but
then we fell off.
It's interesting to hear your take on that, because you're not wrong at all about that. I would just add to it.
I'll check that out.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with you.
That sounds like something I'd be interested in.
On the record,
I agree with you. I think that the crackdown
on the record, I agree with what you just said.
Wrong. It's a mistake.
True.
I don't know what's going on with Epstein. I think say what you will about Elon Musk. The man's not stupid. So I ask myself, like, how would he have put that tweet like that out there if it wasn't grounded in something? And let's say he is completely uninvolved in this, and maybe it's likely pressure from people like what you're describing, these large business individuals. But like, how could you play it worse? It's just such a royal screw up.
Large business individuals at it again. I
don't know what's going to happen, man.
Man, I fucking hate large business individuals. Did you
vote for Trump in the last election?
The last election, I have never talked about this publicly, but I will with you. Yeah, I did in the last one. I don't remember if I don't even think I voted the one before that. I think I might have. When he first ran, the first year I didn't vote. I was in graduate school. And that was like when my journey began.
How old is he?
Really, it's 2016, because that's when I started encountering stuff.
He was in graduate school in 2016.
And I just don't want to lose that. The progress that we have made.
He's 49.
Against
no, 32.
Me being judged by my skin
55?
color. I don't think anyone should be or told when they should speak, or accusations of systemic racism without being founded in evidence and arguments for reparations. We should only be held accountable.
That guy is so old. What the fuck?
But you lay out good arguments. I get your point. I get your points, and I don't want to take up more of your time, man. This has been really
How
been cool
old
talking
is
to you.
he?
It is. I think you, like I said, you
44?
are in the press. You're doing something, and you're one of the only people that. In the shock stuff, I understand a lot of your stuff has been done in comedy, and I would encourage the audience to like look. And I don't know everything you've said. I'm going off of. I wanted to come into this conversation at like a blank slate and say I'm going to make the wild assumption that this guy knows what he thinks more than anyone, and I'm just going to listen to what he says. So that's what this conversation was. But thank you, Nick, for taking the time. I know you don't need to do this, so thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, you know, and the thing I was mad about with the Candace thing is it was like, oh, you said this in this clip. Now you said, I appreciate the opportunity to just kind of be heard a little bit. And I think it was a good conversation. So look, if it's good content, there's a value. You just say, yeah, I don't need to do this. But I like conversations with smart people. I didn't know you before, but I'll check you out now. You're a smart guy. So I appreciate it. And thanks a lot. So it was a good one.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
All right. Good luck. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Thank you, man.
Wow, that was fun. Huh?
Okay.
Okay. And it's over. And it's over. And we're dead.